Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scot McKay.
Greetings, gentlemen. Welcome to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. As always, I am your host, Scot McKay from X and Y Communications. And today we're going to have it's going to be a little bit different of a topic, but it's going to be a fun one, and I think you'll see where we're headed with it pretty quickly. My guest is a returning guest. His name is Jim Wolf, and I will reintroduce you to him very shortly. But before we get to that, I want to remind you that I am at Scot McKay on X, on Truth Social, on TikTok and YouTube, and I'm at Real Scot McKay on both Instagram and Threads, of course. And if you want to join us on the Mountaintop Summit on Facebook, we'd love to see you there. Lots of guys are joining. We're having a great time talking about women and becoming the next guy who gets that woman that we want so badly. So, good stuff going on over there. The website always is mountaintoppodcast.com. Lots to download there. If you've never been there before, well, hey, you're missing out. So check out mountaintoppodcast.com. Dating advice for men who love women, which, hey, I'm all on board with. That is Jim Wolf's brand, and he joins us from Yerevan, Armenia. Once again, Jim, welcome back, man.
Hey, thanks so much for having me again, Scott. I appreciate it.
Hey, how's that lady friend of yours?
She's doing great. She's actually in Copenhagen right now with a girlfriend of hers, so I think she's having a good time over there while we're talking about this fun stuff.
Yeah, well, she is Armenian, and for those guys who are not in the know, Armenian women are gorgeous.
100%. I can't argue with that.
Yeah, I mean, Kardashians are all at least half Armenian.
That's correct, yeah.
Because any name with Ian at the end.
That's right.
Not at the beginning. That would be a Scottish dude, you know.
Yeah, you already knew that. I didn't know that till I actually moved to Armenia and found out that anyone with Yan, Y-A-N, is probably from actual Armenia right now. And then the IAN is kind of diaspora Armenians, like the ones that live in the United States now. So Steve Sarkisian, the football coach, he's sure. Armenian too. So that's cool.
Tarkanian.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
Basketball coach. Usarian from the book and the movie Catch-22.
Exactly.
Yeah, I got a million of them.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah. All right. So it's good to have you back. Today we're going to talk about the dating propaganda. Man, this has got to be a barn burner of a topic. There's so much of it out there. And what I want to do first, Jim, is I want to kind of slap a definition on propaganda, because I think a lot of times people think of misinformation and its close sibling disinformation based on what the media feeds us nowadays, which is cough propaganda usually. But what is propaganda? I think a lot of times people think of it as anything that sounds preposterous, but that I happen to disagree with. But I don't think that's the real definition.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear your definition, because I'm sure there's a few ways to define it. But first thing that comes to my mind is just information presented to the mass market in order to make people think and behave a certain way.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good definition. It doesn't necessarily have to be true. It doesn't necessarily have to be false. But one piece that I read that was particularly illuminating about the purpose of propaganda really spoke to me, because I've, like you, been all over the world to lots of countries. You live in a former SSR right now.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And Russian propaganda, North Korean propaganda, I've read it, and it all seems so preposterous. Like, none of this can possibly be true. Like that Kim Jong-un doesn't ever actually have to take a dump and stuff like that. And so I read a piece that said propaganda, at least the end game version of propaganda, is not designed to change belief or even foster belief. It's designed to test the target market, to see how much they'll put up with, how much BS they'll actually absorb and not respond to at all, or even push back against. And the more preposterous the propaganda gets without people pushing back against it, the more you have achieved mass control, the more your totalitarian agenda is functioning as planned. Crazy and scary, isn't it?
That makes perfect sense. And it's really interesting that you brought up the former Soviet Union, because when we hear the word propaganda in the United States, at least in the past, maybe not as much now, but still today, we kind of think of a regime like the Soviet government or North Korea or something like that. And of course, they do have a whole arm dedicated to propaganda. And you could say that those are some of the strongest examples. But I think many people probably think that the West has less or a different kind. And maybe it is different, but it's definitely there. And we should realize that it's also happening to our populations too. It's not just, there's lots of groups that want power, money, all these kind of things that we're going for in life. And they're not afraid to use propaganda, as you say, to meet their goals. And I think we should be aware of that. Just because we don't live in a fully communist society doesn't mean that there's not propaganda coming at us from every angle. And I think it's really interesting to put dating and relationships into that context that we're going to do in this conversation. So I'm looking forward to what you have to say about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here in the United States of America, we absolutely do have propaganda.
Yeah.
The thing is, we at least ostensibly have two political parties. We're not a single party state. So it's easy to believe that you simply have two political groups vying against each other and you pick one and you vote and you still are, quote unquote, democratically free, right?
Mm-hmm.
But both sides are participating in the propaganda war. And on a related note, I watched a show that was put on by Vivek Ramaswamy, of all people, who, of course, leans right. And he had a dinner party for 5 of his friends, and he made sure none of his friends believed exactly the same way he did when he invited them to dinner. And I mean, they're all like nibbling at a salad for the half an hour they're talking. It's like a faux dinner, but it's a real conversation. Perhaps ironically enough. And one of the hot topics was the one we're on right now. And someone said something very, very interesting. And it's in line with something we've repeated on this show time and again, which is that organized religion has faded in its influence in the United States of America and indeed in the Western world. And it's been replaced with politics, partisan politics. Your party is now your God and the opposite party is the opposition. Some people push back against that, but I think they're kidding themselves. That's exactly what's going on. The part that was really illuminating about this particular conversation that Vivek was holding was someone spoke up and said, what's really interesting about what's going on here is that the Bolsheviks and Kim Il-sung and those folks achieved totalitarianism by moving the population away from the concept of organized religion and towards patriotism. The country is your God. Your allegiance to that country is, well, for lack of a better way to put it, what's going to save you. He goes, in this country, we bypassed that because that would have been too obvious to people. And in going from religion to politics, we bypassed patriotism and went directly to partisanship. And people took it hook, line, and sinker. I'm like, wow, that's just crazy. So yeah, mind control is a thing. And since we're a dating relationship-ish kind of podcast around here, we talk about men being real men. I think there's plenty to talk about in terms of how we in this country, men and women, everybody, are being propagandized to the point of people accepting things that deep down they know really aren't true. But as fewer and fewer people rise up and rebel against being told this stuff, it's starting to stick and it's starting to change our culture, and it's dangerous. And I could think of lots of examples, but I'm going to let you riff away and get this conversation going in terms of some of the ways that's going on that really jump out at you, Jim.
Yeah. So first, I think there's probably more, but there's at least 3 kind of filters of propaganda that I see out there in terms of dating and relationships that I think we should be aware of. And one of them is people with agendas like we've been talking about. There are groups and people who have specific agendas and they want to push anything that fits their narrative to try to control people, change behaviors, et cetera. So I think that's kind of what we're kind of focusing on so far. And then the other 2 filters that I see is marketing. And so the pop culture mainstream stuff is created for young women. That's the target market for pop music, for movies, et cetera. And I have an example I'll bring up in a minute of that. And then I think the third filter is just people not really understanding dating and relationships in general, and then making content that has that stuff in it. So just because you wrote a book or a movie about someone who's in a relationship doesn't mean you know how it actually is working on a day-to-day basis in real life. You're putting your own biases. Yeah. So I think there's three, like that one's kind of a naive form where most people aren't that good at it and don't know how it really works because only 10 to 30% or so of relationships are happy, healthy, and functional. And if that's the case, then most people don't really know how it should work in an ideal situation. And so how can an average person who doesn't necessarily know about that or isn't an expert portray it accurately the way it should be? So I think that's the naive level. And then the second level of that is the marketing. So I don't know, you're probably familiar with the movie Hitch with Will Smith.
Of course.
Yeah, it's a little bit older now, but pretty good movie.
We all.
Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting about that movie is they actually hired a male dating coach to consult on that film. And I'm sure you know him as well, David Wygant.
Yes.
Yeah. Rest in peace, by the way.
Yes, of course.
And so he was a consultant on that film. And that's why a lot of the stuff in there is actually pretty good in terms of flirting and how dating kind of is really going to work in real life and all that. However, the ending that he suggested about how it would probably work with the woman didn't get put in the film. And it's because this is the story that goes with it. This is what he said about it. One of the producers of the movie said, we're not going to go with that ending because my 16-year-old daughter wouldn't like that. And so if you, as a man, especially an adult man, if you just realize that a majority of movies and pop culture stuff, songs, all that stuff, it's directly targeted towards young women. That's their main demographic that they're going after. They want them to feel comfortable. They want them to like how it is. It's not based on what's going to be helpful to society or to you. That's what they're targeting. So always put that filter on when you're watching anything that's in the pop culture space. So that's kind of that second level. And then, of course, there's the people with agendas who have different views of how family should be and how society should be. And those kind of fight with each other and sometimes put out totally opposite messages. And it's hard to figure out which one is true for you or in general, which is true. So I think that's kind of the three layers with one pretty strong example from a movie that we've all pretty much seen.
Yeah, for sure, man. And as you're talking, I can't help but think about how sales used to be that career you'd fall into thinking, oh, this is easy. A chimpanzee can do it. And I'm kind of lazy and I don't feel like really digging ditches or being a plumber or anything. So I'll just be a salesperson, not realizing there really is skill involved and that it takes more than what's on the surface to be successful at it. Nowadays, Jim, everybody's an expert at everything, especially life coaching.
Yeah.
My life is a disaster. I have failed at this 5,000 times. I'm still struggling. That makes me the perfect life coach to help you because I've been there and I'm still there. Yeah. Okay. Well, that feeds into that third factor you're talking about where, you have a lot of people who go, hey, I can write about dating and relationships. This is easy. So you actually end up having people out there, perhaps unwittingly, innocently, perhaps, insofar as intentions go, spitting out disinformation and misinformation. And, you and I both go pretty far back at this point in this field. And I remember back when David D'Angelo and Mystery Method were out there, you indeed had lots of guys say to themselves, oh man, you know what? I've started becoming a little bit more successful with women. I think it would be really cool and I'd look really good if I hung a shingle saying, hey, I know how to help you get women. That sounds really fun. And then they would write newsletters or do a podcast and they're spitting out the same tired stuff that was promoted by David D'Angelo and by Mystery Method. And a lot of it is frankly bad advice. Like, go talk to a woman within 3 seconds of seeing her or else you're probably going to wimp out. And, 4 seconds later, her husband comes around the corner. Or wait an entire 7 days before you call a woman or else you're going to look needy. And meanwhile, you call her 7 days after you met her and she's like, who is this again? Stuff like that was rampant back in the day. And I don't think it's gotten any better nowadays. I mean, I know at least 5 or 6 people who are acquaintances who have decided to become life coaches lately. And almost all of them match up with this script that we're talking about here that, hey, you know what? I've taken my lumps here and maybe I figured something out. So, pay me a couple $100 and I'll help you figure it out too. And it's a real head scratcher. Insofar as Hitch is concerned, one of the things about that movie is, along with what you shared, I think the producers really wanted him to be sort of an anti-hero.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the plot twists is Will Smith's character actually is sort of an imposter. Remember, he's trying to get the girl and she's driving away going, what am I doing wrong? And she yells out the window, "You're doing it now." Exactly. So he can help people be better with women and succeed, but he himself is still face planting constantly with it. But to kind of land this plane here, basically what you're talking about, Jim, is first of all, follow the power, right? The people with the agenda, follow the money, people with a marketing purpose behind their propaganda, and the people who fall for it and think they should just pile on. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then just, creative people, when they write a song or they make a movie, put whatever they think about it into it. Doesn't mean that's how it actually plays out in real life,
Oh, yeah. Motown was infamous for this. Ain't too proud to beg and stuff like that. Oh, yeah. Yeah, because crying and begging helps you get the girl back.
For sure. They love weak men like that, for sure.
Yeah, like She's So High by James Blunt and stuff like that. Infamous.
There's so many songs like that. It's like I'd fall on a grenade for you or whatever.
Oh, yeah,
like,
right.
That's cool to a certain level, but then you're dead, so.
Yeah, I died for you, and, well, I guess that means we're not going to be dating.
The main thing that kind of song goes against is just the fact that it doesn't matter how much you love or care about her if she doesn't have romantic feelings for you already.
Yeah, that's called being in the friend zone.
Yeah, I think like a lot of guys get it doesn't make any difference to her at all. If nobody else loved her as much as you do, it doesn't make any difference to her unless she already loves you also, or at least is interested in you.
You know what's really interesting is I think this whole topic of singing about women in relationships in song can really cut both ways. One of the radio stations I've really started enjoying here in San Antonio when I'm tinkering in the garage, because, the album Rock Station started playing the same 50 songs over and over again. So I started, surfing through the dial, and I found, check this out, a relatively new format, which is classic hip hop. There's a classic hip hop station. And the songs they're playing, a little bit R&B-ish, a little bit, gangsta rap-ish. There is this pendulum swing between being unbelievably misogynistic, like backhanding bitches and hoes, to I'm begging you to come back because you're the only woman for me and you make me cry. And it's like sometimes it's the same artist.
Yeah.
I mean, what is the message? I mean, where is the balance? I mean, there's just two extremes there. And I guess some of it's marketed towards men and some of it, as you just mentioned, astutely, I might add, is marketed towards women. And the women kind of want men to beg for them. At least they say they do in the form of music. And men want to think, yeah, you know what? I'm going to slap that hoe upside the head if she cheats on me. And none of that plays out in real life. None of these people are really wanting that or even going to act that out in real life.
Yeah, and there are some songs and movies, of course, that do portray things in a way that is accurate, I think. It's just there's a lot more that doesn't, and I think it's important to kind of understand these principles so that you can filter those messages through that. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. You need some kind of grounding in something in this specific context so that you don't get pulled around by all these different messages that are out there. And I think it's really important. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. It took me a long time to break through that myself. And now I'm just sharing what I've learned that is actually effective in the real world with real women. That's helped me and thousands of people all over the world. And it's really, really fun and interesting to share. But it's not just in the US, like every culture has their own way to approach this subject. And I think that's the interesting thing about America right now is we have gone really far from how it used to be, and we're in kind of a new space right now. That's why you and I are talking about this, where nobody actually really knows for certain what to do. And in Armenia, where I live right now, for example, the parents get really involved. They kind of help you choose the other person. You live with them, so they're very involved, like it used to be for almost all cultures probably. And so they're a lot more traditional in that regard. And they don't even have dating. It's in the West, it's kind of a modern thing where we like move away from our parents to another city or state, and then we date people on our own for years, and we pick them ourselves, and they're not really involved. And then, you have to figure it out. Like you have to be everything to that person and they have to be everything to you. And you have to figure out if they're right for you and do all that on your own without input from your family because they're not going to live with you. They're not that involved anymore. And then we also have the rise of women in the workplace. They're more equal now in society. And all of that has created this area where people are kind of confused about how things should be and what we should do. And that's an opportunity for these people with agendas and these people who want to market their products. And it's an opportunity for us now also to have this kind of conversation and as individual men evolve and then also, hopefully try to help society come to a place where it's a little more understandable about what to do going forward for most people. And I think it's a lot of work to get there, but I think this conversation should be a little drop in that bucket.
Yeah, that point that you've made about there being a socio-political agenda influence that creates the propaganda, as well as a marketing influence that creates propaganda. I'm sitting here ruminating on the concept of those two being interrelated. Like the more preposterous we can make the socio-political agenda and get people to believe it, then almost automatically trying to live up to that agenda, since it's so unnatural and different than what's been thought of as quote unquote normative in the past between men and women, requires that we spend lots of money to try to keep up with it and live up to it because it's so difficult. And of course, marketing loves pushing concepts of beauty or popularity that are very expensive to maintain and achieve, right? We don't like fatter people. We like skinnier people. You lose your hair, you got to replace it. Breast augmentation, all of these things cost money, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I heard that was horrifying to me is that the whole push towards gender affirming surgery nowadays not only costs massive amounts of money medically to achieve, but basically puts you on the sick care list for the rest of your life to maintain it. And they don't tell you that part. And if you say something like that, your voice is going to, they're going to attempt to suppress it, as we've seen. And I think that's just a particularly radical example. Jim, let's throw our guns on the table here. The areas where men in particular are getting propagandized are pretty easy to identify, and yet we still fall for them hook, line, and sinker, don't we? First of all, masculinity is toxic, so stop it. But we're not given anything to replace it with other than sit down and shut up. The second one is women are no darn good, and women are being told men are no darn good. Just avoid them. The porn's better than real life. Okay, so that is the second one. And the third one is making babies, being a father, being the man of the house. That's all a big fraud. Stop trying. That's not fulfilling. That's not meaningful. Those are the big three that come up in my mind when we're talking about how we've been propagandized. So I'd love for you to riff on any or all of those as you want, or add to the list.
Yeah, I think another one that's kind of out there in society in general that propagandizes both men and women, kind of maybe even against each other a little bit, and also against men in general, is kind of, there's a lot of ideas that are pushed that are not true statistically. So, for example, there's an idea that men don't want commitment and they only want one thing.
Right. And women always do.
Right. Which, I mean, I don't know about you, but one thing I've learned in this job is that women are into that stuff as much, if not more sometimes, than men once in a while.
And vice versa.
Yeah. And also, they did a study in the early 2000s, and they found out that 66% of men compared to 51% of women thought that it was better to get married than to be single your whole life.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this whole pickup artist thing where we're thinking every man listening to the sound of my voice wanting to get better with women actually wants to become the heir apparent to Hugh Hefner. They just want to be a playboy for the rest of their life. And most guys are thinking, well, no, I really would just like to find a girlfriend who's amazing and, get some stability in my life in that front and maybe have a son or a daughter.
Exactly. And so I'm not saying that women don't want commitment either. I'm just saying that the myth in society that's been pushed is that men don't want that. And it's statistically just not true. So these things are really interesting. And you mentioned these agendas. And what came up for me during that, when you were talking about that, is all of the TV shows and movies that show the man as kind of like a fool, weak, not really a strong character. And I get kind of giving females some role models to look up to on the screen. That's cool. I have two sisters. I'm down for that. But in the meantime, we've kind of pushed men down. And I think instead of pushing anyone down, we should just kind of try to raise everyone up to a certain level that we all think is good enough. And I think we can focus on that instead of pushing this group down or that. But as you say, there are people with agendas and people who want to make money that don't care about that. And that's one of the main reasons why it's happening.
Well, one of the key factors that's required to make propaganda function as it's intended by those propagating the propaganda is eliminating the process of critical thinking in the constituency. People have to believe what they're told. You have to create enough noise so perhaps they don't even have time to check into it. And you tell them the same lie over and over again, and they kind of believe it. And that's a proven component of human nature, that the more you repeat something, the more likely people are to believe it. There have been lots of comparisons between real life nowadays and movies like Demolition Man and Idiocracy and even WALL-E, which is relatively new. That's only like 15, 16 years old. Mm-hmm. And more often and more poignantly to the George Orwell universe of books, especially Animal Farm in 1984. And we have definitely gotten to the point, Jim, where it's like, don't believe your lying eyes. Believe what we tell you. Don't accept the receipts. Don't look at the video. Don't listen to the quotes from actual human beings. Just believe what we told you because we're telling you the truth, and all that is lies, lies, lies. And above all, don't talk to anybody else. Don't believe anybody else. Fear all your neighbors because the government is holier than thou and knows what's right for you. Anybody who's been told men and women don't like each other, women don't like sex. That's one of my favorite bits of propaganda out there, whereas usually when a guy tells me women don't like sex, it's usually women don't like sex with him. And that's a repairable situation for most men. But, you have situations where, especially during COVID, we were locked down and told things for 2 years. And people started believing things that just didn't make any sense about men and women and relationships. But if you go out and you talk to women, it's almost surprising vis-a-vis the propaganda we've been fed. Even to guys like you and me who are immersed in this stuff on a daily basis, to hear a woman say, I think feminists are full of it. Women want to be women. We love a man who leads. We want a man who protects us. And we just want to bake cookies, make babies, and, have a little side hustle. But we don't want to go out there and be firemen and be first responders and be fighter pilots and fight for this country. We love you guys for being the heroes who do that. And you're thinking like, well, we've been told women don't want to be any of those things anymore. Women don't want to be moms. One of the big propaganda busters out there in terms of statistics is that the more affluent financially a family becomes, the greater the likelihood that the wife, the woman of the household, is a stay-at-home mom. Mm-hmm. It's usually a choice. But you'll hear the numbers. For example, during the Trump administration, when unemployment was going down, one of the major talking points that the opposition party brought up was that, there are fewer women in the workforce than ever, as if this is an affront to women and we're keeping women down. But the truth is that's more women choosing to leave the workforce because things are financially better at home. But we're told, we're propagandized to believe that the natural order of events, the natural order in general between men and women has somehow been rendered obsolete by society and by postmodernity. And people believe it, even when in their hearts, they're thinking to themselves, well, I must be the weird one because I'm still attracted to women, and or a woman may be out there going, yeah, I still kind of want a real man. Just 15 years ago, it was still perfectly reasonable and acceptable to make fun of homosexual people in the media. And, that was never pretty. That was never something I applaud. But it's amazing how the script has been flipped. So it's almost that it's become more society ridiculing heterosexual monogamy and being a family person. It's really strange. And you got to wonder, what is the purpose? What is the agenda behind all of this propaganda? Because, I don't think it's out there for no reason. it takes some time to boil this frog. So there's got to be a real agenda. What are these agendas that they're pushing on us? What's behind all this, Jim?
Ooh, wow, that's a big one. Yeah, so I think there's a few possibilities about that. There are a lot of groups who could benefit from it. One of them is big corporations. They get to have a bigger workforce, and that drives labor costs down. I'm not saying that they're definitely driving all of that, but it definitely benefits them. It benefits people who collect taxes because it doubles the tax base. And I'm not saying that certain parts of feminism were completely wrong. I think that women should have opportunities. And if we want to live in a truly free society, we should be free to choose to be a stay-at-home mom or go to work, have a career, or both, or however you want to do it as an individual. And we shouldn't judge people so harshly about their choices. We should support them in doing it the way they feel is good for them and their families. And I think that's what we should aim for. And I think there's a lot of pushing people one way or the other. So on one side of this, you mentioned toxic masculinity and this idea that it's not okay to be a certain kind of expression of a man. And we've been told that that's not okay. And we don't have any role models to look up to, like you're saying. And so then the opposite reaction emerges. And there's people like Andrew Tate, for example, that are popular for a reason. On this side of it, they're telling guys a lot of stuff to make them kind of a little bit more hopeless. They don't feel like they have options. They don't feel like they're in control. So, for example, there's these myths that are pushed kind of like women only want men with money. And it's really interesting because if you don't have a job or you have a steady job, of course, you're more attractive when you do have a steady job. But that doesn't mean that every woman is a gold digger. And her actual romantic feelings for you are not based on how much money you have. She can't see your bank account. Her subconscious mind doesn't even know what that is. It's all based on her feelings. And she might meet you when you don't have any money and fall deeply in love with you. And then it's a great bonus later when you do have a good career where you can support a family and you can take care of that if that happens with her. That's kind of what almost all women care about that. It's not that they just want your money, because the ones who want money are in love with that guy's money, not him.
Yeah, you mentioned Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate represents a doubling down on toxic masculinity, which really, whether he and his followers realize it or not, is accepting the propaganda and buying into it. It's a rebellion against the propaganda prima facie, at face value, without really considering the reasoning behind it, or maybe there's an out-of-the-box response that's warranted here. I believe, I'll go ahead and say the quiet part out loud because we've done it on this show before, and, there are guys who applaud it, and there's guys who think I'm full of it, but really it's getting harder and harder to deny that there is a push to keep men and women from being attracted to each other, getting together, and making babies. There's pressure against the birth rate, and there's pressure against masculinity. I believe they're related, but actually separate agendas. I think the birth rate issue is because we need fewer people on this planet, because we're going to need fewer in the workforce as, AI and the anti-industrialization of humanity, if you want to call it that, is imminent. I also believe that we have figured out how to slow or stop the aging process. That'll get rolled out with the elite first, but really people are going to live a lot longer into the future. So that naturally means we can't just keep spitting out babies. Second of all, I think the agenda against masculinity has to do with masculinity being the power that provides and protects and leads within a family. And when there's a black hole created in a quote unquote family situation without masculinity doing its job, what steps in? Government.
Yeah.
And that's where the people who spin the agenda and want the power have been lying to us, getting us to believe something that is really contrary to our being. You wrap it all up, and this all really does have everything to do with us being stripped of our critical thinking skills. You see it all over the comments on the news sites and on social media particularly, where someone who understands how this game is played, this game of logic, just throws one straw man out there after another. Well, I disagree with Obama's stance. Oh, then you're a racist because you don't like black people. Well, wait a minute. I didn't say that. All right. I'll agree with Obama then. That's a straw man argument. And this goes on all the time. It's like, well, I don't believe masculinity is so toxic. Oh, then you think women should be abused and held down and not allowed to vote. Like you said, and rightly so, feminism had solid roots. Women did need to be paid more. Women did need to vote. But now it's gotten to the point where women pretty much are getting paid as much. There are people out there who surmise, and I think there's something to this, that the reason why a lot of women don't get paid as much is not because they're women, but because they're not as assertive in their negotiation skills when they get a job as a man might be. I think there's something to that. But there are more women in higher education. Women are still living longer. Women have more rights and privileges. The stigma against being homosexual, LGBTQIA, is largely subsided in this country. And the improper reaction to getting what you want from those movements is definitely not to go punish the people who you perceived as having oppressed you before, because then you simply become the oppressor and the roles are reversed. If we really want equality or even equity, then we have to talk about each other as fellow humans. And see, when we get outside and actually talk to our fellow humans, instead of accepting this propaganda that is thrust upon us, we find people are human. We all really just want to live and be happy together, gay, straight, black, white, and yes, male, female. But what's happening, and part of the propaganda movement here, Jim, is that people are being discouraged from being social. I mean, social media is not really social.
That's exactly right. That's really well said. I think social media is antisocial because we need to see body language. We need to high five and hug each other. We need to go out in person, including on dates. And a lot of people are meeting only online now, which is fine, but it does take something away. So I think that men and women at a deep level, mostly if they're heterosexual, they want to be together. We don't hate each other as much as our society is trying to push right now. 100%. And there's a lot of guys out there who are discouraged right now. They think all women are this specific kind of, and I'll tell you what, that's totally not true. There are
100% not true.
Great women, there's medium women, and there's really bad ones, and you just avoid the bad ones and find someone who's also, on the same page with you about most things.
But that would be logical, Jim.
Yeah, exactly. And that goes against this bubble that they're trying to create. On one hand, telling men that it's not okay to be masculine. And on the other hand, saying all women are kind of these trashy beings, and they're not going to like you if you're not 6 feet or above or whatever. Most women just want a guy who's a little taller than them, So all these things are so egregiously pushed right now to make people feel so bad. And I don't think reality is like that. And we're not spending time in reality with people. And that's the biggest problem that you just identified.
Yeah, reality. What a great word. Here's the bottom line, gentlemen. I think this is a three-legged stool. First of all, you were created to be a man. That's the authentic reality. So those masculine feelings you have towards women, even being sexually attracted to them, right? Wanting to lead, provide, and protect. Those aren't evil. Those aren't to be suppressed. Yeah. Those have real, actual meaning in terms of the family unit and your role as a man that leaves a positive mark on this world and on your family and on women and does great things. Second of all, learn to think for yourself. Critical thinking doesn't mean that you think everything sucks and you're critical of it. It means that you're looking at things, trying to find the logic, trying to pull it apart and saying to yourself, does this make sense or am I being lied to? It used to be higher education was all about teaching critical thinking skills. Now it's all about indoctrination, which is the exact opposite. Be a one-man wrecking crew sworn against being propagandized. Is what I'm being told making sense? Is what I'm believing in line with what my core values are as I've decided what they are? Is there an alternate reality being pressed upon me here? And where can I find evidence of the true reality? Get your news from different sources. I know it's definitely comfort food to listen to and talk to only people who agree with you, but go listen to the opposing side. There are studies after studies demonstrating that once we allow ourselves to believe something, it is next to impossible to undo that bird's nest of cognitive dissonance. We push back against it, but you've got to remain open-minded and you've got to listen to what people have to say. Whether you lean right or lean left, I can double dog guarantee you will read something the other side puts out that will make you rethink what you thought about your side's opinion on something. Because here it is, neither side is 100% right all the time and the other side 100% wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this whole thing we got going on with the hurricanes right now and FEMA giving money out and where the money went and what's going on there. You got to read different sources to get down to the bottom of what's probably going on here. And here's something I just posted on X the other day. Hey, insofar as the hurricanes and the response to it are concerned, stop listening to left-leaning media and right-leaning media. Find someone who actually lives there and ask them what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get truth real quick. I have several friends and acquaintances who live in the Asheville general metro area, and they'll tell you something completely different than what either side of the news is saying. So think for yourself. And here's the last and most important one, man. Actually get off your damn device and go talk to people. Go be social. Learn how humans really work and what's really important to each other. And sometimes you may need to break through the propaganda and the indoctrination just to get through to people, but it's worth it. Man, I tell you what, this has been a great conversation. Do you got a final point or two to add for these guys before we close, Jim?
Yeah, just one thought came to mind while you were talking about critical thinking and thinking for yourself, and that is leadership. And as much as we've changed as a society, most women are going to be attracted to you if you're a leader. And that starts with yourself. Who do you trust? Who do you let influence you? We're all influenced by other people. Who do you decide to let influence you? Pay attention to all that stuff because you have to lead yourself first if you're going to lead a woman in a relationship. And leadership doesn't mean that your way goes or it's your way or the highway. It just means you think for yourself. You are a critical thinker. You share that gift with the woman that you are dating or that you're in a relationship with. And a lot of women really will appreciate that because they don't necessarily want to decide which restaurant to go to. They want you to do that. And that's a lot of freer energy for them. And they appreciate that. And I think most women will really like that. So I think that touches on everything. It's not just a force against the propaganda that we're hearing out in society. Also in your personal relationship, it's going to be more attractive to the woman that you're with as well. And that's a gift that you can share. And you take her opinion into, you take what she suggests in as well, and you work together on it. But at the end of the day, you have to lead yourself, and then you can lead her as well.
Yeah, I'm into all of that. And you know what's interesting in particular about that whole idea or that whole ideal is that we as men know that being sheeple is not attractive to women. Mm-hmm. We know that's never going to make a woman like us more. We have to be a decision maker. We need to be informed. We need to act out of wisdom. And it's hard to do that. It's impossible to portray masculinity in the way that women find it to be attractive when we're just being propagandized. And we know that. Again, you know, it comes down to the same thing. We allow ourselves to accept a lie we know we're being told. And then, you know what? We're under control, right?
100%.
We all need to be a lot more like Rage Against the Machine. Remember that song? F you, I won't do what you told me. Yeah, that's the way we got to be as men. His name is Jim Wolfe. He's from Dating Advice for Men Who Love Women. And when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Wolfe, you will be teleported to Jim's page. Jim, what are they going to find there?
I have a free ebook for you today. It's called How to Get Her Number and Text Her. And it's basically just that, how to get a woman's number in the easiest, smoothest way possible, how to send those initial texts and get something going. And when you download that free ebook, you're also going to be registered for our newsletter. And I send out a weekly newsletter every Thursday. It's high quality, so we'd love to have you over there. And then on my website, we also have some products as well, so you can check that out if you want to.
Yeah, man. You also get a free video breakdown of Brad Pitt's body language secrets.
Oh, yes. That's a good video series. It's interesting. It shows there's one video that says this is good body language on a date, and then there's one that's bad body language. So you can see what it actually looks like in real life.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, as always, my good friend, a fantastic conversation. Thank you for being a part of this episode and extending your wisdom to the audience. And I hope we can do it again sometime real soon, man.
It was great talking to you as always. And thanks once again for having me on, Scott. I appreciate it.
For sure. For sure. And gentlemen, please take what we talked about to heart today. Don't believe everything you're told. And if you don't believe it, don't sit on your hands quietly. Lead, go talk to real women, think for yourselves, and guess what? You will be part of the solution, not part of the propaganda problem. How about that? So definitely, guys, go out there, man up, and represent with regard to the truth, with regard to masculinity, and especially to the women in your life. And if you have not been to mountaintoppodcast.com lately, download the book Sticking Point Solved, get in on the latest master classes, and you can also get on the phone and talk to me for free for about a half an hour. The schedule is right there. It's online. Pick a time. Let's run with it. Let's talk on the phone. This is for real. I'm exactly who you think I'm going to be. I don't play a fictional character on these podcasts, and I look forward to talking to you. Jocko Willink's company, Origin in Maine, Hero Soap Company, and the Keyport all have been longtime sponsors of this podcast. Please check all of them out at mountaintoppodcast.com as well. And when you get anything from any of our three longtime sponsors, definitely be sure to use the coupon code MOUNTAIN10 to get an additional 10% off. It's all there for you and more at mountaintoppodcast.com as always. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.